Hello, and welcome to the IMRF SAR UK webinar. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box to the right. My name's Caroline Jeep, and I'm the IMRF CEO. I'm thrilled today, in the morning in the UK, to be holding the IMRF's first SAR UK workshop. As most of you know, the IMRF since last June is having an awareness campaign to increase the awareness of mental health and wellbeing in the maritime SAR sector. We're also later in the year going to be producing guidance and best practice, drawing on the expertise of our members from around the globe who are involved in our SAR UK working group. Part of this campaign also involves running workshops like this, online and in person, where we have the opportunity to come together to share expertise and experience on this important topic. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by 5 speakers who are each going to share their organisational expertise on this subject. First up in the session, we have Mark Brady, and followed by the RNLI. In session 2, we're joined by Frederick Forsman, who's introducing psychological safety in SAR, a prerequisite for courageous leadership. Unfortunately, in session 3, our speaker from New Zealand is unable to join us, so we'll be led by Graham Harding from NSRI in South Africa, who'll be talking about dealing with stress and trauma. We're going to be having an in-person session on our SAR UK campaign at WMRC coming up in June 2. So if you haven't got your ticket for that event yet, please do. And I'll write some details of how you can join us at WMRC in the chat box. And later in the year, we're planning to have a SAR UK workshop again online and another one in person at our annual meeting at RS in Norway in November. Save the date details will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. Thank you again. I hope you enjoy it. And as always, for all our webinars, please enter your questions in the chat box. Each presenter will answer your questions at the end of their presentation. Thank you and enjoy. And I now pass over to Mark. Mark, are you joining us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm here. Sorry, I didn't realise I'd automatically been turned off with the. I'm just waiting for my slides to appear. There they are. That's okay. Okay, good.
Okay, I'll leave you now. Okay, I'll leave you in Mark. Leave you to hear Mark's presentation. Thank you, Mark.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Yes, well, we're all working out. I'm going to talk about creating a base for colleague health and well-being, particularly around mental health. We've got about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to pass you on to Adam and Claire, and you can answer any questions. So welcome, everyone. I can see lots of people from all around the globe. That's great. Well done for staying up or getting up early, those who come there. I'll give you a bit about my background. I'm a counsellor and therapist. I specialise in psychological functioning in hostile environments, in particular things like terror attacks. And I look at hostile environments now, not just as conflict zones, which is where I started, but actually as an environment that people feel threatened. So that can be anywhere from the office supporting staff to people like yourselves who might be out on boats and ships doing search and rescue. I will quickly say that I'm from the north of England, and I know I have an accent, and I'll try to speak slowly. But I also have everything done as notes, which will be available through the SAR website. So if you don't understand anything, please ask me to say it again, or just look at the notes later. I also do training worldwide, particularly critical incident stuff, where that's what I'm doing at the moment in Wales later on, where something happens and I turn up to look at the psychological function support. And as part of that, I talk about how to do well-being, how to set up a well-being program for organisations, from corporate organisations to NGOs. On this particular talk, I've been asked to think about how we start. How do you start with wellbeing? Now, there's an awful lot of information out there to do this. So there's lots of really good information. All the things I've looked at, you can access free through a number of NGOs. So if anyone wants any of them, you'll have my contact details at the end. Just ping me a text or ping me an email and I'll send you what you're looking for. But the basic start should be, as I would say, simple. Start really simple. Anything more complicated leads to more barriers and more challenges. So for some of you who are really big groups, you're probably well into this process, but you can look at this process in terms of, do I want to do a specific thing about wellbeing? And this works for that. But also, if you're a small organization without a lot of resources and you want to do this, it's also designed that keeping it simple means it can actually grow. So this is what I'd start with when I was telling people how to do things. The communication side. The communication side is probably the most important. And I would say the communication has to be between yourselves, the people who are going to lead this or have got the idea that they want to do something with wellbeing and colleague health, particularly around mental health. So you need to be able to communicate yourself, first of all, clearly. What do you want? You need to look at it and think, what are we going to do here? I'd caution you to say, don't overthink it. What are you trying to address and what will success look like to yourselves with your idea and to your colleagues? If you try and get the perfect program straight away, it's going to be really difficult. I think programs start with something that your resources can manage. Have you got the people, the money, the time? Given that everyone's busy, funding is always required for all sorts of things. And time, of course, is only 24 hours in a day. So look at that first, and then that will help you think, what am I going to do? I put down there, start small and uncomplicated. Because a well-being program that goes through the whole thing really needs to be quite accessible. And it needs to be something that people are capable of doing. If you throw something complicated, and there's some beautiful programs out there, people might look at them and think, I can't manage that. So really you have to think about, I've got a great idea, but is anyone going to actually be able to access it, and will they feel capable of doing it? If the answer is no, then really there'll be little motivation. So you need to go back and think, let's have something small. And it is organic. These things tend to be a process whereby you would build something, refine it, review it, look at it, and move again. And it's also going to be led by your colleagues, because ultimately they're the people who are going to use it, and they're the people who will benefit from it. So their feedback is vitally important. So the communication, understand yourself, what do you want, and then get your colleagues to understand as well what they want, how that would work. So I look at this, explain your concept and thinking behind it, because you have to be honest and open about this with your colleagues. I've been to organizations where they've come up with something and it sounds very good, but it's difficult to access and there's no real concept acknowledgement behind it. And then people think, is this at worst never going to happen, or is it just going to be a tick box where they're going to say we're going to do this and it doesn't happen? So a simple thing would be say, we feel a wellbeing program is needed because of high-risk environments in which we sometimes operate. So I work with SARS teams all over, and this is one of the most obvious things. You work in areas of high arousal that can happen very quickly and have a high risk potential, even though you work very hard to bring that down. So do that, and then ask your colleagues, what do you think would be useful? What do you need? Because you may have an idea that you think is really good, you may really like it, but that doesn't mean that your colleagues will. It might not be what they want. They might want something completely different. And I've seen this quite often where people go, oh, we should do this, we should do this. And then when the feedback from the colleagues come, when they do a simple survey, actually it's slightly different. So that the first bit of the communication is really just to talk the idea through and then talk it through with the colleagues. And that's quite simple to do, as we'll go through. Lots of free survey tools out there, lots of surveys which I can access if you want to start this process. So I can give you templates for all of this that starts the process of communication, where you ask, what do you want? This is what we're thinking. What do you want? And then you can start to narrow it down back to the small, non-complicators. So that's the beginning, communicating with yourselves internally, communicating externally. And as I say, there's plenty of tools out there, lots of free ones. I can help you access if you want to. On to the next bit. Arguably, the most important thing following the communication is the follow-through. If you don't follow through, or you don't follow through in a regular manner, people start to think you haven't done anything, or you've done a survey, you've got all these answers, you've had a meeting, and nothing's happened. So follow through, I would say, is to be done not at the end when you say, here we are, this is what we've got. You should follow through all the time. The first survey, when you're communicating your idea and asking for responses, follow through with an email saying, this is what we've discovered, this is what we think, what do you think? Develop more little surveys. I'd keep them short, just a few questions so people find the time to do them, that shows where you're going with the process. So if it's going to take 3 months to put something in place, at a minimum, I would say every month you should be communicating. This is where we are, this is what we're doing, what do you think? Really simple things to keep people on board. Remember, whatever you do has to be accessible and doable. The feedback might come back, oh, I can't do this because this is where I am, this is my situation with work, my situation with my home life. You have to take that on board. So that constant communication, building up to the delivery of what you're going to deliver, is important. Apart from anything else, what it does is it brings people on board. They feel part of that journey. So as you're following through, the follow through is not the end result. The follow through is that journey going on. You will find, if you're doing that, that people will become your natural champions. And you need these people to be enthused. You need your colleagues throughout to talk to each other, to say, oh, I'm thinking this, what do you think? That small internal communications that you're fostering by doing these regular follow-throughs on the process of what's happening will help that big moment when you deliver it, that people are ready for it. People will naturally champion it. You may have, luckily, the resource to find people who are really enthusiastic about mental health and well-being. The first thing I noticed when I came to the place I'm going to be working today was they have mental health first aiders and they have them dotted on the wall. And I thought, great, you already have people who are interested and champions for this process on the wall. The other important thing is you have to get senior management on board. They have to be shown to be doing what you're saying should be done. They have to walk the journey with you. It's always a danger when some things, I've worked at a major firm who did this, and they beautifully got the CEO to do a short video saying why they thought it was important from a very personal point of view. It made such a difference. People then believe the process because this person had taken time out of their day to make a video that's personal and talked about why they thought mental health and support was important. And so they thought, okay, the organization really is behind this. So that's one thing to do. Other things about following through is the regular updates. Don't just rely on emails and surveys. Do things like posters. Have things like posters on the wall saying where you are. Update them regularly. Another firm I worked with had a poster with a Dropbox so people could just put an idea in as they thought of it. So this whole idea of communication, following through on the communication at a regular regular intervals is the basis for what you're going to do. If small mistakes are made from time to time, people won't mind that. People don't mind, oh, we thought we wanted to do this, but we've listened to what you've done and we're going to do this, or we've had a good idea from someone else, so we're going to tweak it. People don't mind that. People understand that these processes can be complicated and they need to be thought through. So don't worry about that. I'm very keen from my background in research on gathering data. All the questionnaires you do, everything you're talking about is data. I would strongly suggest you start with a survey that gives you a base point that you can use, the same one all the way through, as well as a regular little communication surveys. You get a questionnaire and then find out. That will help you understand, is what you are doing working? And there's some really good ones. There's a short form by the World Health Organization. It's very good, only 5 questions, measures a huge amount. But you need to have that to know, because you need to know, did you, when you review the plan, did you meet the original goals? What have you learned? What has gone well? What you can improve? Because a wellbeing program is not just one bit. It's not just about the mental health. It should involve things about physical health, lots of things about sleep, lots of things about diet, lots of things about exercise, lots of things. They all lead up to mental health. The mental health that people talk about with mental health first aiders and people like me being on site, the big psychological side of it, really should be the end game. I would suggest that what you're trying to do is to build a base. It's really simple. Start with that, and all of these things help emotional and mental health. So that should be the whole program. But collecting data so you know what you do, what you've done, whether it worked, and what to do next is vital. The Gates Foundation, after 10 years of child education and $100 million, went to review it and discovered they hadn't collected the data. So they spent a lot of money, done a lot of probably very good work, couldn't prove any of it had worked, didn't know where to go, didn't know how to finesse what they'd done to make it better. So that'd be the final thing I'm going to mention. As I said, all of this is down in a quite nice short note form, which has got sort of links to various surveys, questionnaires, how you can do that. Feel absolutely free to get in touch with me either directly, and here's my number, or going on to the Are You OK when you're looking at that and you're looking back on this, there'll be a link there, hopefully you'll be able to get in touch with. I realise that we have other people coming on. I know that Adam and Claire from the RNLI are going to come on next. So we've got a few minutes to answer any questions. So feel free to go ahead, because I don't want to eat into their time. Okay. If you have any questions that come along later, or you have any thoughts, Caroline can always get back to me. I'll be around in and out for much of the day. I can say I'm going to go on site and do some work there, but I have regular breaks and that, so I'll touch in. And any questions that get asked, I'll take a note of and get back to you. For now, I can see my little clock ticking down. I know that Adam and Claire are going to come on and speak. So thank you for listening. I'm going to pass you over to Adam and Claire from the RNLI for their talk. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye now.
Thanks, Mark. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Morning, everyone. Adam Dixon from the RNLI. I am the Trim and Wellbeing Delivery Manager, joined today by Claire, who's our Medical Operations Support Officer. Realising that there's going to be a varying degrees of understanding about what the RNLI do, looking at the list of attendees there, I can see there's many people from the RNLI who will be fully aware of all this, but many people from across the world join us today, so thanks for taking the time. A quick snapshot to give you an idea of the scale of the operation that the RNLI work towards. Really, because we're pushed for time, I didn't want to go and spend a whole host of time scene setting, so thought an infographic would cover that off best. Throughout the presentation, in an attempt to give you as much stuff to take away that might be useful to you, we've included a number of QR codes within the presentation. So if you've got your smartphone handy to you, it might be useful to have it with you to scan some of the QR codes to get some takeaways for further reading that you might want to follow up on. So we're going to take you through the RNLI's journey, a bit of a timeline through welfare and wellbeing within the RNLI. We're going to start in 2010. Like many other organisations, our welfare and wellbeing journey started with an employee assistance programme. Link there, QR code takes you through to our service provider, Workplace Options. This service is available to our operational volunteers and has remained largely unchanged since its introduction in 2010. Bit of a backbone of the service that we provide. In 2014, we had a growing realization that our lifeboat crews and lifeguards were increasingly responding to traumatic service calls. So a working group was established to understand and develop a plan to help mitigate that risk. That was really led from an operational perspective. Throughout 2014 and into 2015, that same working group concluded that TRIM should be piloted within the RNLI as it was evidence-based, it aligned with NICE guidelines on PSD management, and its successful adoption within other organisations and agencies. Again, another couple of QR codes here for you. On the left here is a link through to March on Stress's website and published research on TRIM. And link on the right is the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence PTSD management guidelines. Now, what is TRIM? I don't want to spend a whole host of time on kind of selling the wares of what TRIM is, but it is a peer-supported and facilitated psychological risk assessment post-trauma. Looking at some of the attendee names there on the right-hand side, we have quite a few TRIM practitioners actually on the call today. So in 2016, TRIM was piloted across the organisation in a targeted geographical location, although we did have a large enough team at that time to respond out of pilot area should there be a need. And again, link here if you want to grab your smartphone, a really useful one, this one, which is the evaluation report to the RNLI pilot of TRIM across the organisation. Some useful learnings can be taken away from that report. At the same time, also 2016, there was the development of the RNLI's Families Project. Now, realising that as an operational crew member, there is inevitably an impact on family life. So this project was introduced to try and work with families and mitigate that potential upheaval that carrying a pager, being an operational crew member might have on family life. Whole host of incentives were put and listed there. But this document that the QR code takes you through to is the Welcome to the RNLI Family booklet. This is issued at the point of induction, shared with family members of operational crew members to give that wider understanding on welfare and wellbeing provisions across the organisation, but also that kind of watchful eye over their family member on a welfare and wellbeing perspective. This resource was developed with Lifeline Scotland, Scottish Mountain Rescue, and a number of other agencies from across the world actually who had similar documents. Into 2018, when TRIM was adopted as business as usual across the UK and Ireland. To allow that to happen, we recruited for a full-time delivery manager. At the time, we recruited for an additional 30 volunteer practitioners. Standard operating procedures, policies were aligned to match that of the TRIM process. And Trim was repositioned from, as I say, an operational space where the pilot was housed to occupational health, where it still remains now. At the same time, 2018, we saw the recruitment of a full-time welfare advisor to allow for case management and resource development. And also, again, like many other organisations, the mental health first aid training was introduced across the organisation. A little bit disjointed at that time, but there was many pockets of activity on mental health first aid training taking place in 2018. So into 2020, this saw the publication of Our Watch, the RNLI strategic intent, with a particular focus on keeping our people safe. This gave the organisation a mandate to prioritise the welfare and well-being of our people. The pockets of support services were brought together to reform a centralised welfare and well-being team. We also saw the recruitment of a full-time wellbeing coordinator to centralise the mental health first aid support, and that proactive communication that Mark kind of really focused on in the previous presentation there. That was really one of the key activities of the wellbeing coordinator. That completed the wellbeing lineup, and as it remains today, and currently we collectively manage over 230 volunteers in two distinct welfare and wellbeing roles, that being of a mental health first aider and a Trim practitioner. Before I hand over to Claire, I thought it would be useful to give a little bit of greater insight into a little bit of data in the service usage, particularly of the Trim peer support service. You'll see there in the yellow, that was last year, 2022, and you'll see that we saw 150% service usage increase from the year prior in 21 and 2020. Granted, both COVID affected years, but nevertheless, we are still seeing an increase in service usage. In fact, to the point of Q1 this year, we've seen an additional 100% uptake to what it was in 2022. Final slide from me before I do make a handover to Claire is just to say that from our first data insight in 2014, that traumatic incidents that our lifeboat crews have responded to has continued to increase. Yes, noted, there was definitely COVID affected in 2020 and kind of has had knock-on effects in 2021 when we've seen a significant spike and then dropped away again last year. But that there has been that steady increase over the years. I'm going to hand over to Claire now because Claire's going to kind of take a little bit more in-depth look at some of those traumatic incidents that we're responding to.
Brilliant, thanks Adam. So while Adam and his team look at the whole organisation, so the permanent staff as well as the volunteers, my role is very much to dig down into the operational perspective, so looking at what's happening at our lifeboat stations and with our lifeguards. So what trauma are we seeing? So we're seeing an increasing number of service calls to suspected self-harm incidents and attempted suicides and body recovery activity. We are involved in rescuing migrants in the Channel in the southeast, and that can be particularly traumatic, of course, because it involves children, women who are pregnant, women in labour possibly. So there have been traumatic service calls around that activity, and there's great potential for further exposure to that trauma, of course, with the ongoing effort there. And it's probably important to mention that any service that is outside the usual human experience can be traumatic, and sometimes it will depend on the life experience perhaps of the crew member, or what's going on at home, or maybe their childhood experience. But really anything that happens outside of that usual human experience can be traumatic. So any one of our crews, any one of our lifeguards can experience trauma. We know that we have geographical areas where we see more trauma. We've got statistics that show 11 of our stations make up 51% of launches to self-harm incidents, and 8 crew members have responded to over 200 suspected self-harm incidents. So we've definitely got these geographical areas where responding to trauma or potentially traumatic service calls is frequent. What we're concerned about is normalizing behavior. So where crews are going out regularly to suspected self-harm incidents, or to do body recovery activity. We have concerns around that becoming almost a normal and routine event for them. We're concerned about the cumulative effect of repeated trauma and what all this means on the long-term mental health of our crews. And of course, worried about people not coming forwards because of the fear of stigma. And do we still have crew members and lifeguards and anyone across the organisation who's not coming forward to seek help because of that fear? So what are we doing to help? We appointed a medical director in 2021. This is our medical director, Arup Mazumdar. And I was appointed earlier this year in January as the Medical Operations Support Officer to support the medical director. A large amount of our work is around mental health in the operational space. A mental health special interest group was set up, and we've run 2 of those groups now, and they drive all of our activity around this sort of mental health support in the operational space, and it drives all the activity that you're going to see in the next slide. So this is really what we're looking at doing in terms of our actions going forwards, moving away from being reactionary, helping people, we're very good at responding to trauma and helping people with the TRIM process. We've got mental health first aid and all that kind of thing that Adam has already spoken about. But actually we're looking at supporting people right from the beginning of their time in the RNLI and all the way through to the time when they leave. And that starts with induction. We're looking, at the moment, we're creating an induction video to really start that awareness process and start that messaging around mental health. So the video looks at what people will be exposed to, what sort of shouts they might go on, and highlights the fact that they might attend traumatic incidents that will have an effect on them. It's not heavy going, it's just signposting, and it's just letting people make that decision to carry on with their service if they want to, or gives them the option to really think about what they want to do and whether they do want to do it. It also, the induction video will also talk about what keeps us well, what sort of things look after us, what our protective factors are, and how we can build that resilience. And all light touch, it's just an introduction. And then we'll also talk about the service, the support that's available to people. So that's very much induction right at the beginning of their journey. We are developing some preparatory training as well. So taking people again right from the beginning before they've experienced any trauma, hopefully before they've experienced any trauma, but working with them, training them to understand what keeps them well. And we've been working with a training provider in Scotland, Lifeline Scotland, and there is a QR code there to scan if you want to have a look at that in a bit more detail. But that training is really looking at what resilience is, what keeps us well, what we can do to keep ourselves resilient and to bolster those protective factors, and to understand what happens when we're challenged, and to really make people aware that they can do quite a lot themselves in terms of their lifestyle to keep themselves well. So that's all about catching people upstream and preparing them in advance of any trauma. We know that good crew cohesion and having a well-gelled team is a really good protective factor in looking after someone's mental health. And so we're also looking at team training, again through Lifeline Scotland. And that's a course called Supporting Your Colleagues. And it's all about recognising perhaps when somebody else needs a little bit of help and how to have that conversation, gives you the right words to use in order to support your colleague. It's also important to train the leaders. So looking at our coxswains, our senior helms, lifeboat operations managers, area life-saving managers, teaching them to in how to have active listening skills and how to have a psychologically savvy conversation with team members. And again, we know that having a well-gelled team and having a supportive leader in whatever form that is, supervisor, manager, team leader, is a really important way of keeping people well or minimizing the impact of trauma. So we've been using React Mental Health training, which is part of March on Stress, to develop those skills in active listening, in allowing our leaders to have a look at their teams and recognizing when someone might be struggling, and then knowing how to respond to that and what sort of conversation to have. So that's all very much preparatory stuff. When it comes to the post-trauma support, we are developing a decompression tool. And this is to fill that gap between a potentially traumatic event or a major incident and the point where TRIM kicks in, possibly 48 hours later. We want to make sure that that decompression, that post-event debrief is well structured and consistent across all of our crews. And so we've worked with March on Stress, actually, and our psychiatrists and our medical advisory committee to come up with a decompression plan, which scripts out a debrief to make sure that we're covering all the elements that we need to cover, to make sure that we're not doing any harm in terms of that debrief, and to make sure that it meets those nice guidelines on how you support people post-trauma. And of course, Adam's already talked about TRIM, our post-trauma support, and we have a fantastic network of TRIM practitioners. And we also have clinical services that we can refer people onto if we need to. So really taking people right from that beginning point of their induction, training them to look after themselves. And a lot of this is in development at the moment. And then we've got that really good post-trauma support. What it looks like for the future for us then, so we're continually evolving, and a lot, as I said, a lot of this is development, but we continue to invest in equipment and training, because we know that actually having the right kit and having the right training is another protective factor for our people. And I think that lesson was learnt in the military a long time ago, throughout all of our conflicts, and it certainly holds true here, that with the right training and the right equipment, people have a bit more resilience, as well as all the other things that we can do to keep ourselves well. We're also working with other organisations such as the Rail Safety and Standards Board, looking to work with the fire service and also military charities to share that best practice, because we're not alone in developing our mental health support. We've had some really great help from the Rail Safety and Standards Board, actually, and we continue to work with them and to hopefully work with the other organisations as well to continue this journey in terms of developing our support. The next bit is more of a want or a desire. We need to understand what the long-term impact of exposure to traumatic events, and particularly that repeated exposure, that cumulative effect. We'd like to know what the long-term impact of that is, so that we can work to support our people. So just to summarise what Adam and I have talked about then, you'll have seen that over the last 13 years, there's been a real journey in terms of our welfare and wellbeing support. We've taken what was pockets of support and it's developed into this centralised function now. And there's been a real investment in welfare and wellbeing and mental health support. We are now looking to move away from that kind of reactionary support stance to a more end-to-end approach, with continuous messaging right from the point when people join all the way through to the end, messaging around, are you okay? It's okay to not be okay, and to speak up. And hope that by using this sort of collaborative working approach with other organisations, that we can learn from each other and share and develop this in the best way possible. As Adam mentioned, our strategic intent document, Our Watch, has its first outcome of we keep our people safe. So I hope that today Adam and I have taken you through that journey of how we keep our people safe from a welfare and well-being perspective. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please do shout, and Adam and I will answer them if we can. I'll just have a little look in the chat.
I've been keeping an eye, Claire. I don't think there's anything jumped out.
There's one. Dave Kilpatrick said, is there a way to find out which 11 stations that are doing the 51% of self-harm launches, or if a particular station is on that list? I do have the statistics of that. So actually, if you want to, I couldn't say all of them now off the top of my head, but I do have a document that has the statistics around that. If you want to get in touch with me, you can ping me an email. I'll probably reply to you, Dave, and we can chat about that on email if that helps. We've also got a question from Maria saying, do you see a lot of personal matters? Oh, it moved. Sorry, personal matters mixed with the trauma suffered during shouts? Adam,
I can pick that one up. Yeah, absolutely. People are complex. More often than not, you might have an individual who's dealt with traumatic service calls historically and processed their experience as well. And it could be that something going on in someone's personal life, finances, relationships, health concerns, work pressures, relationship pressures, whatever that is acting in some way as a blocker to that processing of the traumatic service call. So part of the awareness and the training that our TRIM practitioners do is understand the whole suite of welfare and wellbeing support provisions that are available. Because if it was a financial pressure that an individual was under, that is causing a sticking point to someone processing that traumatic experience, then our TRIM practitioners can signpost to financial support to unpick the potential the stress factors that an individual's under to help and ease that burden. So yes, most definitely, it is never one thing. It is always a complex mix of pressures.
Thanks, Adam. I don't think there are any other questions, so that's all from us. I will hand you over to Frederick from the Chalmers University of Technology, who's going to talk about psychological safety in SAR. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation.